Back again with another one.
Another one, another one.
Welcome to my world.
Welcome to my world. It's Bigg Vic TV.
Welcome to my world. It's my world.
Give me a thumbs up just for this intro.
What is up, guys? It's your homie Bigg Vic. We back in here with another video, and today I wanted to give you guys my top 10 music producers that inspired me as a up-and-coming producer back in the early 90s and up until the early 2000s. Some of these producers are still creating banging tracks, and they influenced me to want to be in the music industry, not just as a artist but as a music producer, when I really started understanding that the music producer is the one that's really making the masterpiece along with the artist. You know what I'm saying? We provide the sound, the soundtrack, we provide the landscape for artists out here. So let's get right into it. But before I get into my top 10, I want to give 2 honorable mentions to a production crew and another producer out of the West Coast. And that first producer I want to give an honorable mention to because I couldn't squeeze them in my top 10. So that producer is DJ Battlecat. I'm sure you've heard his production. He's produced for Exhibit, Snoop Dogg, The Game, Tupac, the Eastsiders. He definitely is solidified in the game. His production is crazy. Like, he came way back around that G-Funk era, around that time with, you know, Dre and other producers. Back then, what I would do is I would always look in the credits. You know, when we used to get CDs or get cassette tapes, I would always look in the liner notes of the credits and always see who produced the record, who were the writers who produced the record. I kind of miss those days, and some of you guys definitely know what I'm talking about, especially if you were looking or aspiring to be a music producer. I would always see Battlecat's name pop up on beats. I was like, oh wow, Battlecat produced that. That's dope. Battlecat is definitely one of my inspirations. Just couldn't slide him in my top 10, but he definitely, as far as like West Coast, he made bangers, straight bangers. Second production crew will be Organized Noize. Of course, you guys know Organized Noize. Goody Mob did tracks for Outkast. That Atlanta scene, like these guys are incredible. You probably seen the documentary, but I would definitely was feeling their whole vibe, feeling all the live instrumentation that they would bring into the music game. You know what I'm saying? So Organized Noize are definitely amongst my influence. Just couldn't completely put them in my top 10, although I would love to. I would put a whole bunch of people in the top 10 if we could put them in the top 10, but I can't put them in my top 10 just yet, even though they were dope. They had influence on me. I definitely loved their sound, the landscape that they provided for Organized Noize. The landscape that they provided for Goody Mob, also tracks that they did for Outkast. So let's get into my top 10. All right, so my top 10, the way I'm laying it out, I'm just putting my 10 in there, is not saying that this person is really number 10 on my list or anything like that. They're not really in no particular order. I'm just doing a 10, all right? So if I put somebody at number 1, don't say, oh my, well, so-and-so produced better than him. That's not how I'm doing this. I'm just lining them up in 10 producers that I admired, that inspired me along my production journey. So let's get right into it, y'all. Coming in at number 10, RZA. RZA was one of the producers that made me get more into playing my sounds and kind of helped. I kind of started moving just a little bit away from sampling. Even though RZA sampled, more times than not, he played most of the instruments, you know, on the keys, looking for sounds or whatever it was he played. And he was using the ASR 10. That's what made me get the EPS 16 Plus growing up, watching RZA and other producers that were using the Ensoniq hardware samplers. EPS 16 Plus, the EPS, and then the ASR 10 was the big dog. I couldn't afford the ASR 10, so I was able to get my hands on the EPS 16 Plus. listening to RZA's production, it highly influenced me making a purchase of the EPS 16 Plus. Shout out to RZA. You already know RZA's credentials. I don't even have to get into his entire catalog, Wu-Tang to say the least, and everything that spun off from Wu-Tang. Coming in at number 9 for me will be Large Professor. Large Professor from the group Main Source. Large Professor has produced for so many artists. I love his production style. He definitely was an influence on me as I was coming up as a producer and kind of learning the production game. Large Professor has produced for Pete Rock and CL Smooth, Noize, Busta Rhymes, Master Ace, The Executioners, Tragedy Gaddafi, Big Daddy Kane, Mobb Deep, A Tribe Called Quest, and so many other people that I don't know the names of right now. But Large Professor, man, is one of those that was cooking up straight fire, straight heat in the 90s. He's one of the ones that shaped that sound. He cooked up that heat on Nas's first album. You know, so he's definitely a pioneer as a producer in my book. Definitely one of my big influences coming up as a producer. Number 8 would be my man QTip from A Tribe Called Quest. QTip has some of the craziest production, especially on a Tribe Called Quest projects. QTip produced for Nas, Craig Mack. He also produced the track Crooklyn, Busta Rhymes. The list goes on. QTip has an extensive catalog, especially for Tribe Called Quest projects, mostly all of their projects. QTip's production style and the way that he would chop samples, the way that his record finds, like everything was just unique about QTip, and a lot of his music inspired me as a producer. You know what I'm saying? Like just being able to ride to his music. I mean, just his entire creative process inspired me as a producer. So shout out to QTip. Coming in at number 7 is Chris Charity and Derek Lynch for Solid Scheme Productions. They were a production crew that produced a majority of the production for Das Effects when they came out. I really respected their production style and got into their production because they came out with a sound that did not sound like anyone else's production when they came out, and just specifically producing for a majority of all the production that was done for Das Effects, some of their biggest records. These guys produced, and just their production, like period, the way they sounded, the way they created a landscape for Das Effect to tell their stories on was like amazing to me. Like I really was inspired by their music production. You know what I'm saying? Just to be able to listen to those Das Effects albums and hear the production the quality of the production that did not sound like everybody else's production at the time. This is what made their albums stand out, and, you know, their music stand out because they did not sound like everything else that was out at the time. You know what I'm saying? So that goes back to producers creating a sound around artists, you know what I'm saying, like that they put out back then. So shout out to Solid Scheme. I couldn't find pictures of those guys, so I had to I used the photo of Das Effects, you know what I'm saying? So shout out to Solid Scheme. Coming in at number 6 is DR Period. DR Period made some classic records for artists like MOP, AZ, Cameron, Cormega, and if I'm not mistaken, he did a lot of production for Rough Riders. DR Period, his production style was crazy to me, like straight crazy. This guy was definitely an influence for me as a music producer, and I just loved the way his sounds, the way his production came out, the way artists sounded on his production. He made a lot of high energy music production. So if you're not familiar with DR Period, definitely look him up. Look up some of the records that he produced. Check out some of the MOP records. Dude's phenomenal, straight up. DR Period was the man, still is the man, because I think he's still working on projects up, till this day. So Yeah, DR period, number 6. Number 5 is the homie Havoc. Havoc is, to me, definitely in a class of his own. Havoc has produced for some of the greatest artists out there, including Eminem, Nas, Foxy Brown, Onyx, The Notorious Big, Jadakiss, Styles P, Method Man, The Game, Puff, LL, Lotta, Darkman, Roth, Big Noid, OGC, Tragedy Gaddafi, Capone Noriega, you name them, Havoc laced them. So, funny story. I remember I met Havoc in person. I was out in Queens. Some of my cousins, they went to school with Havoc, grew up with these guys. They grew up with P and Hav, and they introduced me to these guys. I was at Havoc's crib out in Hempstead, New York, while everybody was outside blowing trees or whatever. Walked in the crib, Havoc over there cooking up, putting production together. So yeah, Havoc was definitely a huge inspiration. Like, listening to the Mobb Deep project, that's around 97. That's around the time when I dropped my album. You know, just listening to those guys, man, inspired me to want to put a record out, you know, and I put a record out. So Havoc is definitely, those guys was a big influence on my music. I remember when I put my record out, I sent my attorney had my record, and we gave it to, when I gave her the record, she was like, her husband was like, yeah, I put them in the mind of, you know, the Mobb Deep, that particular sound when they heard my album. So yeah, those guys definitely were, Havoc's production was definitely a big influence on me coming into my, you know, my producer sound. So shout out to Hav. Coming in at number 4 is my man Eric Sermon. Man, I can't say enough about the Green Eyed Bandit and his production. His sound shaped the 90s with EPMD, Redman, Keith Murray, Illegal. The Green Eyed Bandit is a monster when it comes to music production. Himself and his protege, Rockwilder, you know, production was bananas. Like, I grew up off his music and was inspired by his music. His production style was definitely crazy. He's definitely one of my favorite producers of all time. I said one of my favorite producers of all time. So definitely the Green Eyed Bandit. Man, production was crazy. That whole funk sound. That was it. He laid that. He laid the foundation for that funk sound on the East Coast. E-Double. Shout out to E-Double. Coming in at number 3 is the homie J Dilla. Now, J Dilla, his production sound, his production style was definitely really different. His style was more so unquantized. Drums, everything just was different about J Dilla's production style. And later, you know, as I grew as a producer, I started learning more and more about J Dilla and his production, and just listening to some of his music production just, you know, really inspired me. This guy was a record connoisseur, a producer connoisseur, I call him. And that's why he's coming in at number 3 on my list. J Dilla is definitely in my top 10 as a music producer. He's definitely a phenom with production credits. J Dilla is definitely known from the group Slum Village. J Dilla's laced artists like Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, Busta Rhymes, Erykah Badu, The Far Side, Madlib, and Common. You know, if you're producing for Erykah Badu and Common, you definitely got flavor. You definitely got a different sound, because Erykah's just not taking tracks from anybody or getting any type of production on her album. So you know the homie J Dilla was that guy. Coming up at number 2, of course, y'all guys know I can't leave out the one and only DJ Premier, my man Primo. Now, when it comes to being able to identify a producer's sound or crafting your own sound, DJ Premier was the epitome of that statement right there, as well as the other producers that are in my top 10. Now, Primo, you can tell it's almost like Primo used the same drum kit for every track he ever produced to my ear. So when you hear those drums and you hear that certain drum pattern, you knew exactly that was a Primo track. Or if you heard scratches on the record, you knew 9 times out of 10 that was a Primo track. Now Primo, his catalog or his track record, the artists that he produced for it's a long list. First group you have to name when it comes to Primo is Gang Starr. Produced I think 100% of the production for the Gang Starr albums. Primo has worked with Anderson .Paak, AZ, Big Daddy Kane, Big L, Black Poet, Bun B, Cannabis, Christina Aguilera, Common, D'Angelo, Dilated Peoples, DITC, which is Digging in the Crates crew, Dr. Dre, Fat Joe, The Game, Ill Bill, Janet Jackson, Joey Badass, Kanye West, KRS-One, The Lady of Rage, Limp Bizkit, Lord Finesse, The Lox, Ludacris, Mac Miller, Mobb Deep, M.O.P., Mos Def, Nas, The Notorious Big, OC, Papoose, Rakim, Royce da 5'9", Snoop Dogg, Exhibit, and a plethora more of individuals. Y'all know DJ Premier sound when you hear it, so it's just, all I gotta do is say DJ Premier. All I gotta do is say Primo, and y'all already know the track is gonna be crack, right? So that's why Primo is definitely one of my biggest influences from the 90s as a music producer. Shout out to DJ Premier. And last but not least is the Don himself, Dr. Dre. Snoop Dogg, The Chronic, Doggy Style, NWA. Oh my God. The list goes on. It's just as long as DJ Premier's list. And again, when we go back to talking about creating a sound, crafting your music production style, creating a sound of your own, Dr. Dre is also the epitome of just that statement once again, because it's something about Dre's drums, it's something about the sonics that Dre has, something that he does when he crafts a track. You know what I'm saying? Like, that Dre sound was just a ridiculous sound, and it was incredible when you heard it. You feel me? Like, that was one producer that you couldn't wait to hear the track that he created. Dr. Dre was definitely one of the producers that I looked up to coming up as a young music producer in the game, and just following, you know, what these producers were using, how they created their sounds, how they crafted their own lane in the music production space. So that's my top 10, guys. If you have a top 10, who's your top 10 producers? Drop them down below in the comments. I want to see who's some of the producers that inspired you guys. If you got a top 10 list, drop them down below, man. Let me know what y'all guys think of the video, and make sure you thumbs it up. Make sure you thumbs the video up so that we can get some love from YouTube to share this video. If you're digging it, share the video, like it, drop a comment below. Always hustle, never stop growing. It's your man Bigg Vic. Till the next time. Peace.